I've known this week's guest for over 15 years, and it has been an honor. She is humble, kind, and brilliant. Yuh Nelson. Jen is best known for directing the films Kung Fu Panda 2, Kung Fu Panda 3, and The Darkest Minds. Jen is the first woman to solely direct and the first Asian American to direct a major American animated film. She was the second woman nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature for her work on Kung Fu Panda 2, which has proved to be one of the most financially successful films directed by a woman. Now she's working on Netflix's Love, Death, and Robots. Here is Jen's story in her words.
Well, do you want me to start?
You can start.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for being here on In Her Words. You have been a friend to women in entertainment, and we are just so excited to have you. The format for the podcast is we are trying to get away from project announcements and those kind of, and
The
really
typical
hear
Hollywood
your story.
press.
Yeah.
More real conversation.
Yeah, and hear your story and what were those turning points in your life that led you to where you are now, and the creativity and all that is you and your career. So we would love to hear that story.
I think so much in this business is about the happenstances, the happy happenstances that come across us, and how we run into really wonderful people that can serve as mentors for us. People who have sort of seen how you're struggling when you're trying to break into business and trying to learn from really knowing nothing. And they support you and they protect you and they're friends to you, and they somehow help you craft a career out of basically stumbling in, not knowing what's going on.
Did you always know that you wanted to be creative? I mean, as a child, were you creative?
Absolutely. I was from a family of artists. My sisters are artists. My mom is an artist. And so, in fact, both my sisters are in the business, and they're storyboard artists in animation. So watching them draw and watching how good they were, and sort of seeing what I wished I could be like a couple years out, because both of my sisters are 2.5 years older and 2.5 years older beyond that. So I was the youngest. And so I could see the future in their ability to draw. So I wanted to do that. It just always brought me joy. And it was like watching magic happen and seeing something created out of nothing, went out of piece of paper and pencil. So I just wanted to be able to do something like that forever. And I never knew that it could be a job. I thought it was a hobby. I thought it was just something fun. And then to see people actually do stuff with it, to create with it and share it with others, it was just, what else could you do but to follow that?
Where did you see it? Where did you see people using art as a career, as their livelihood, that kind of let you know that it was okay to think that way?
I think when you're a kid, you don't really think of people making anything that you're watching, whether it's animation or live action or anything on TV or film. It just happens. It just exists, and you don't think of the people behind it. I didn't really think about it as being a career until really college, because before that I was going to go into book illustration or comic book illustration or editorial illustration. I was an illustration major. So I thought, well, I guess I'm going to be doing like little editorial images for newspapers or children's books, or maybe some dark comic books or something like that. But I never thought that there was a career in animation. And then my sisters got jobs in animation, and then I saw guest speakers come into my college art classes, and one of them was a live-action storyboard guy who was Dave Lowery. He did a lot of Steven Spielberg's movies at the time. And he showed us storyboards, and we saw stuff for like Jurassic Park, and it was amazing. He could draw little rough sketches, which is all the stuff that had such liveliness and such beauty and such cinematic flavor, and he could actually make a career out of it. And he had all these pictures put up, and he showed it to us and said, "This is what storyboarding is." I thought, I want to do that. I want to do that so badly. I could taste it. I could taste it. I just wanted to do it so badly. So, after that, it was a bit of an obsession.
Oh, wow. Like, did you, back, I want to say back then, but when you think about, you've had such a long history, particularly in animation, how have you seen the technology evolve? Where do you see it going? It's crazy from storyboarding and what it used to be to where you are now.
It is shifting so fast. It's kind of insane. when I started, there was a long tradition of things kind of being the way they were, and anime was starting to make their inroads into the sensibilities of the audience. And I think it took a little minute for people to even realize that anime was a thing. I think before that, it was like, this is kind of weird. Whereas, me and all the people straight out of school were like, no, that's all we watch. Don't you understand? That's all we care about. The camera language was different. Storytelling was different. Aesthetics were different. It was more actually live action based than a lot of theater based animation in America.
Yeah.
So that taste started to change. And then when 2D ran up against 3D, I was at Dreamworks and we're doing that changeover. You had people who had careers doing 2D animation, beautiful, amazing, talented animation artists that suddenly couldn't figure out how to get a job anymore. And they had to figure out how to do 3D animation, work with computers when they had never worked with computers before. It was just pen and paper or pencil and paper. So each round of change brings this massive sort of influx of new talent and sort of an exodus of people just who can adapt. The people who can adapt stay, and they just carry their talent, which is is across all types of storytelling and types of media. All the basic skills are still there, and they can carry it through, but some of them just don't make it, and you see major flux and change.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember, just because obviously I did some PR for DreamWorks during the time you were there, and in the past, there's been a lot of different talk around women within animation, and because animation is a longer process, because you're looking at, films aren't, hey, we tape for a couple months, and animations, your backlog, like you have 3 or 4 years. When you were doing like with How to Train Your Dragon and Kung Fu Panda and so forth, it's like these are eras of your life.
So commitments.
They're like, and particularly with women, it's like you've really made your mark, in that world and become a mentor and mentee and somebody that a lot of people aspire to be. When you look at animation now, because of the technology, are you seeing the time frame for animation shrink? That it's almost offering more opportunity for women and, for that kind of change of the guard in so many ways? Or is it still a little bit?
I don't know if technology necessarily helps or hinders, because it's just another tool.
Yeah.
But the people who are chosen to lead these projects tend to be chosen for other reasons than technology. And I don't think people even think about the length of time for the project when they're choosing the leadership, because, you set it, forget it, and then come back later and freak out if it's not looking good. That's kind of the process of feature animation, where I think that the technology has changed in that it democratizes a lot of who can get access to making stuff. It sort of separates it from a location.
Yeah.
Like before, you had to be near a studio, you had to be in the building.
Oh, right.
I think now there's a lot of more opportunity for people to make their films out in their homes, in their garages, in different countries, and just sort of communicate with people all over the world. Again, that can help men, women, anybody. It just, I think it does allow for more films to be made.
Okay.
Whereas before it was more sort of only a few that could be made at a time.
I find, and this is my naivete, and I'll own that, but when you talk about directing, an animation film, what is, like, walk us through that process.
Oh,
because it's you're like, when you're when you're putting that story together and the story arc together and how you direct, like, I'm fascinated by this. So, and I know, as it's like, you obviously have a lot of accolades in this area, and
I think there's many ways of approaching it, but I do think that being a feature director requires a great deal of coping mechanism. You have to go through all of them, because it is a very long time frame. You're looking at 3-4 years of everyone not being able to see the results of their labor
Yeah.
And they're working and they're getting frustrated and they don't know if it's working out and they don't know if the idea is good and they've got nothing to show for it, nothing to show the studio, nothing to show the executives. People writing the checks have seen nothing for years.
It's wild.
And so that requires a whole lot of salesmanship, saleswomanship, a lot of sort of therapy, a lot of person skills, a lot of artistic handling, and downright like wild animal training. It's kind of like that. But day to day, you're just basically in the trenches with a lot of amazing artists, and you create a sense of family, a sense of safety, a sense of like you're all working on something together. And after the therapy, after the meltdowns, after the sort of meetings where you have to get everyone on the same page, once you get that feeling of teamwork and community, it's an amazing thing. It's just truly amazing to see 300, 500 people working towards one goal, and they trust you. That is a massive weight to feel, their trust, that they're offering their skills, years of their artistic, time to sort of trust in your vision of a film, that they will be proud at the end of it. And so that's hard.
What was the impetus for you wanting to direct? Because you advocated on your behalf of yourself for this with Jeffrey, yes? Or
I did not want to direct.
This was Jeffrey coming to you.
No, it was actually Melissa Cobb coming to me, because Melissa Cobb was a director. Sort of, if you go back even further, I didn't want to direct in TV animation either. And Catherine Winder came to me and said, "You're going to direct." And I said, "No." She said, "You're going to do it." And I said, "Okay." So I did that. And then I went to Dreamworks and I was a head of story. And actually, I was a storyboard artist. And then Brenda Chapman came to me and says, "You're going to be a head of story." And I said, "No." And she said, "Yes, you are." I said, "Okay." And then I was a head of story, and then Melissa Cobb came to me and said, "You're going to be directing Kung Fu Panda 2." And I said, "No." And she said, "You're going to be directing Kung Fu Panda 2." I said, "Okay." And then Jeffrey came to me and said, so I am not a great advocate for myself. It's really sad. But the reason why I've gotten to direct at all is because there have been amazing mentors that pushed for me and basically saw that I had the ability to do it. And I do think that there's a lot of women, I've heard this a lot, and it's true for me too, where we don't believe we can do something until we've done it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We don't walk in and say, "Well, I have no credentials whatsoever, but I can do it." It's like, no, you kind of have to have proof to yourself that you can do it before you agree to do it. And these mentors that I had, those 3 women that stepped in each time, basically said, "We see you can do it. You may not see it, but we can see that you can do it. And we are running the risk of sticking you into this position."
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful that I did not get fired, and I did not make them look bad. But and I'm very grateful that they trusted in me. But it did take a lot of people pushing.
Yeah.
Have you seen that in people working with you and for you, where you're now pushing for them?
Absolutely. I think it's all a part of paying it forward, because
Now, do you feel bad because they because you're pushing someone now and you're like, "Wait a minute."
now I understand the other side of it. No, yes, well, I do think it's important, because unless you have people in your corner, then how is anything done? How do you actually survive? So yes, I do think it's a huge thing now. If I see an opportunity to help protect and encourage a female director, it's really, really important to me. Super important. And I think it's also doubly important for them to get the kind of support that they understand. Like, they can see someone that's been through everything they've been through and can actually have an advocate that is truly sort of coming from the same background, same difficulties, same struggles. Mm-hmm. And to see their face light up with that sort of sense of encouragement, support, and hope is just, I remember how important that was for me. It helped me survive day to day, having somebody to bounce off of, feeling so that I could really trust them implicitly, and that they had my best interest in mind. And that's all that I really want to offer the next crop of directors.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's an amazing thing to try to achieve and be.
It's really hard. Being a director is hard. It's a lonely, lonely job. And Guillermo del Toro actually said that to me. He said, it's a lonely job directing because, it's hard. You can't really understand how hard it is until you've done it. And so if there's any way of helping someone survive that process, I think it's very important.
In terms of the loneliness of it, is it because, you're in charge and you don't have that venting, that you have to be almost like the therapist, the cheerleader, like you have 8,000 hats and you can't, but you don't necessarily have that yourself?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't show a lot of the doubt because, again, you're looking at 3 or 4 years of holding on to, holding at bay other people's doubt. Yeah. That's your entire job, of having them believe in the project and having them believe in this form of this idea. So you can't stop and go, wow, I really don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm really screwing up today. And then all the people in the room are going to be like, well, what about the work I just spent the last week doing off the idea you told me last week? I mean, what am I going to do with that? And then that ripple effect of doubt. Yeah. And you can't do that. You have to show belief and you have to show inspiration. You have to show a lot of the energy and the uplift to sort of carry other people along. So you end up venting to your pets, talk to them. You really shouldn't talk to your spouse because, they've heard enough of it. Yeah. You can maybe talk to your friends outside of the job. And if you're really lucky, if you have a good producer like I had, you could share your doubts with them, but you really can't show it outside.
Yeah.
Is there a difference in that feeling if it's a feature length versus shorter episodic or different creative styles? Does that help with that feeling or that isolation, I guess, how long it is?
I think it does help. I'm currently working on short form and I love it because it's short.
You're like, I don't want to go down the 3 or 4 year tunnel.
Yeah.
No.
Basically, all projects go through that terrible time in the middle. I think a lot of people have talked about this. All projects have that awful U-shaped pattern. You start happy, like, yeah, it's going to be great. And then you get to the middle, like, I don't know about this idea. I'm questioning everything. At the end, hopefully, you're back to, yeah, it's great. But that miserable middle is on everything. On a feature, it's a very long, miserable middle.
Yeah, because it's the same percentage.
It's just stretched out. Whereas in a short form, you're really short. You don't have time. You just are in enthusiasm, and hopefully it will carry you through to the end, and you just work really hard to get there. So there's a little less therapy and more a lot of making sure that in the super fast turnaround that everyone has what they need.
Are you? Do you ever get a chance to go back to storyboarding and drawing and things yourself, or do you? Do you want to? Do you get to?
I always storyboard.
Okay.
It's one of my joys. And it's actually, all directors come from different backgrounds. And since I come from storyboards, it's part of how I communicate. Okay. And so I always storyboard on my own things. I try to storyboard as much as I can. I have a great story crew when I'm working with story teams. On short form, sometimes I'm literally storyboarding the whole thing myself or I have somebody to help. But I try to storyboard as much as I can because I love it. It's where you get the weird ideas, the visual ideas. Is awesome. when you sit down and you try to work it out, and all the sort of the idiosyncratic choices can happen, and it's not word based; it's visual based. Mm. So I love that, and people I work with said it's super convenient because they don't have to. You figure out and interpret what the director wants. Yeah. Because it's there.
Visually,
there you are. Yeah. That's the shot I want. Please. I want the camera there for this reason. I want the storytelling point to come out for this reason. The actor is doing this character is doing this in this moment for this reason. And everyone can look at it and it's far less open for misunderstanding than just words on a page. Yeah. Because 5 people will interpret words on a page in 5 different ways.
Well, it's interesting because I think that writers sometimes argue that handwritten is better than typing because they have similar to probably as drawing is that it comes naturally. You can see the story art, versus I don't obviously use CGI or go into animation or any sort of drawing programs, but some people might feel the same way in that sense, that it's easier to pick up a pen to paper, no matter, even if it's writing or drawing, that it flows, the flow is easier to reach.
Right, because all people want when they're working on something, when they're trying to do the job the way the director's asking them to do it, is they're trying to figure out what the director's thinking. I mean, often it's opaque. Sometimes they don't get that much time with the director, but if you can see into the director's mind, the better, the more information you can get, the better. Then you know what is trying to be achieved. And something like a sketch or something like words on a page where you see scribbled out and little arrows saying, the word I wanted was here, and they do a little circle, you can sort of see the process and what's going on, and then you know how to hit that target.
When you storyboard, I don't know the process. Is the script already done and then you're putting visual to the script, or do you work together with the writers?
Often you work together with the writers. Okay. Sometimes it's back and forth, or I've worked on scenes where the action scene is just like, and the action scene is here, and you figure it out. And then after you're finished with the board, they put it in, or the other way around. You get entire scripts that are done, and you're just boarding it. But for me, as a director, you're working on the script before you ever board it. For me, I have to know what it is before I ever draw. Some artists like to think on the page when they're drawing. Their hand has their brain in it, they say. Yeah. Me, I have to see it in my head done. And then I'm printing.
Okay.
And when I draw.
Interesting.
Do you ever even with Kung Fu Panda, when you're spending 4 years, do you ever continue the journey on your own? Not for formal, I know there's a Kung Fu Panda flip, all this up, the franchise continues, but you're no, this is where I'd have it go. On a late night, I have a glass, a secret, because you have to attach yourself to characters, right? You're no, I don't really see it going, the studio can take it that way, but with my glass of wine at midnight, this is where I think it's going to go.
Well, I think it's you do on your free time where you don't have time to do on your job. Yeah. And so I don't tend to draw the thing that I'm on.
Yeah.
I always draw my own personal stuff, which is dark and demented and awful. And so I do that on the side. And every time I get a chance, I do that on the side. Sometimes if I don't want to do the project that I'm on right that moment, everybody has those days where I don't feel like working today. I feel like doing something else.
Yeah.
But you have to. And so sometimes I would literally have my hobby project on the side on a different window, and I'd draw on that. And then I'd quickly flip over to the work project, trick myself into just carrying that energy over. But I almost never work on my work projects outside of work.
Oh, interesting.
Do you write also?
Yeah, for myself, I write all the time, and I work on all the scripts. But I don't think I want to write scripts.
You're until somebody pushes you to.
Probably.
Until you say no, and then they ask you again.
I'm like a square boulder, aren't I? Just
challenge taken, challenge accepted.
Perhaps I need proof that I can do it before I'll do it.
I have a question. Going back to the creativity question that Renee asked with technology. Do you think that does the creativity have to be different if you're using a pencil and a piece of paper versus technology, or do you think the creativity, the story in your mind, is still coming out? It's still the same, but it just the mechanism is different. Did the creativity have to change?
I actually don't think the creativity is affected in any way by the output device, because that's what it is. If you think about it, people have to cope with what they have. If you have a stick and a muddy piece of ground, you will communicate with that.
Okay.
If you have a car, you will communicate with the most insane driving. You will communicate with whatever tools you have. And so everyone has all this maelstrom of ideas in here. And some people are fortunate enough to find ways of getting it out. Some people never do, and it's just in there. And then, it's just stuck. But if you can get it out somehow, it'll find a way. in all these weird imperfect methods. And so some people communicate their creativity through a keyboard and a computer. Some communicate by dancing. Some communicate by singing. Some communicate, as I do, with scribbling little storyboard panels. But it changes. And I think as all the tools progress, as new tools are found, people are going to use those tools. Like, oh, I didn't have that tool before. Now I can get this out by using that tool. And so more tools there are, the better. But everyone's got something in there.
How do you feel the industry has changed as it pertains to, animation and where it's going? It's like, I just, knowing what it was like, kind of like early 2000s and to where we are now, it's like, is it night and day, especially going from like a studio like Dreamworks to Netflix? What does that look like?
It is pretty night and day. I think that the pace of change is so fast. I think people are struggling to keep up in a good way, because it sort of forces you to find new ways of presenting these ideas so the audiences will be like, I haven't seen that before. Wow, that's cool. It's gotten to the point where audiences are constantly saying, I want to see something I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And so you can't rest on, oh, I have a 30-year legacy of drawing these kind of characters the same way.
Yeah.
People are going to get tired of that by next week.
Yeah.
So you need to find new things all the time and challenge the type of storytelling. People used to only think of animation as being a kid's medium in Hollywood. Yeah. I remember, again, I was talking about anime when I first started out. And I said, oh my gosh, like Ghost in the Shell and Akira are so cool. And people would be like, what are you talking about? And now everybody's, if they even remember those shows, they'll be like, of course, that's way cooler. So the aesthetic is different. Storytelling is different. The fact that adult animation is coming into the mainstream is different. That used to be mainly independent films or anime. Right. And now it's here. Everyone wants to see that. So now I see a lot of scramble. Everyone's trying to do full spectrum storytelling at this point. And it wasn't the way before.
Do you think that also has to do with the platforms and the proliferation of content in the world just kind of like democratizing and flattening, and the fact that everybody has access to it versus how we used to consume content 10, 15 years ago?
I do think it's changed a lot, because with the type of content that people have access to, they don't have to watch the 4 or 5 sources now. They can watch so many different things and absorb information so many everywhere, and at all different levels of quality. And I think that because of that, the demand has changed. People want different things. And because of that, people have to give different things. Yeah. And I think you could have presented the exact same shows that are doing well now 20 years ago, and they have. And no one would have bought them, and no one would have watched them. And now people are scrambling trying to make stuff like that, and people are trying to find stuff like that to watch. And it's a little bit of an adjustment for a lot of people.
Do you have a preference, or has your view changed on all the different when you're creating of where it's going to go, whether it's theatrical or it's episodic on premium television or a streamer? Do you see different? Do you create differently, knowing where it's going to go?
I do create differently, mainly because if you're making a family feature, you don't want to traumatize the kids.
Right.
If you're making an adult animated series, you're going to do whatever you feel like doing, and not worry, because people are going to understand walking in the door, this may not be appropriate for your child. This may be appropriate for you, So that's mainly it. But my personal sort of inner creative turmoil, the thing inside my brain that I try to get out, is more adult content. It's more full adult storytelling. It's not family audience stuff. So it's always been a bit of an adaptation, trying to sort of soften the blows a little bit so you don't make it too harsh. So one thing I really enjoy about sort of the wider opportunities right now is that I don't have to pull my punches. I can do the extreme level of storytelling, the purest form of how to show these ideas without necessarily trying to soften it. Yeah. I think people are tired of seeing things softened. They want to see things pure. and people can tell if it's not quite being its true self. It's nice being able to be that free.
Do you find, when you're creating these characters and these, or building the characters in these worlds, do you find that writers and the creators are putting themselves into these characters? Like, what does that characterization look like?
What does that characterization look like when you're creating these characters, you mean?
Let me throw characterizations and characters.
Are they personal?
But meaning like,
into them?
when you look at, scripted and unscripted, or human television, like I'm trying to explain, like when we talk to some directors in live action, a lot of writers put themselves into the scripts, or they put these little characters, or they're working through their own issues within these characters, right? So does that still bode the same within this world?
Absolutely. I think that you can't help but draw from your own life, your own sort of experiences to craft what you're doing. It's the creativity is about sort of making sense of all the weird things that you've run up against in life. That's what it is. And so you're going to be putting people you've met, experiences you've had, situations you've had, jokes that you've run into, like, wow, that was weird. That really happened. You're going to put that into something. Observation is key. And what are you observing with? You're observing with yourself and what you're going through in life. I think that's part of the reason why, as you get more viewpoints, you're going to get different stories. Because all these people have different experiences, and they're drawing from their experiences. They're drawing from their families. They're drawing from their own lives. Mm-hmm. I draw characters that are specific to my experience a lot of the time. It may not seem like it, but it's because there's always a kernel of understanding. You have to understand these characters. So they will be real.
We're going to be looking for that in all of your characters.
Yeah.
Be like,
tell us what you're watching or reading or listening to right now. What are you loving right now that's out there?
I am watching a whole lot of Korean dramas right now. But the reason why I love a lot of Korean cinema is because there's so much great quality stuff, and it's different. Like, I have no idea where that plot's going to go half the time. It surprises you. It doesn't follow any known formula.
Yeah.
And it's so good. It's so juicy. So I watch a lot of that. And strangely, I watch a lot of Asian costume dramas and horse trimming videos.
Really?
I like horseshoe trimming videos on YouTube. I watch so much YouTube.
Do you find, because of just how generations have changed and how they're consuming content, do you find that children's watching, even like the family movies, have shifted in terms of their content or their tenor and tone?
They have completely shifted because kids are not just consuming what we give them. They're watching stuff on TikTok. They're watching things online. They're watching things their friends made, It's very, very a language in and of itself. And so since they have all this, and it's literally like in their experience, they're having that put right next to a Disney movie. How different could it possibly be watching TikTok and then watching a Disney movie? They're sort of melding all these things within their own minds, and they're asking for certain content that they may not be getting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's changing a lot. It's hard to keep up, and probably by next week they'll have changed their mind about what they like. That's what they do.
It's what they do.
It's what they do. But I think it's healthy for people to change and find ways to challenge themselves creatively, try to find ways of telling their stories differently, and surprising people. Because honestly, why else are we consuming entertainment than to be surprised by what we're watching?
Yeah.
We don't want to sit there and go, yeah, I know what's going to happen in a minute. Right. Yeah, there it goes.
Be surprised and delighted.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, oh, I did not expect that. I'm so excited about that. Like, I did not see that coming in a good way.
I'm going to be interested in Korean dramas now. It's like,
I know.
That's interesting.
I have not even approached that kind of that sector. Genre is the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
So, Jen, one of the things that we are starting to do and that we're looking at is it's not a book club, but it's we're calling it a book Nook of, talking to our network and kind of seeing what they're reading and what they're writing and things along those lines. When you look back in whether it's your childhood or what you're doing now, like, are there certain books or certain content that has shaped your life and your perspective or view of the world?
Wow, I read some gnarly stuff when I was a kid. But probably right now, I'm trying to revisit a lot of old science fiction books because in college, there was a little corner of one of the libraries where they had a donated section. And it was all this personal science fiction novel collection of somebody. So it was like this little set of shelves that nobody went to. It was like an abandoned little corner. It had all these amazing science fiction books that were not necessarily the best science fiction books.
Yeah.
They were downright bad, some of them. But they were all good. You know what I mean? Good, bad. And there are some good ones in there. There was a ton of Isaac Asimov, of course. And one of my favorite books when I was growing up were like The Caves of Steel. Okay. And so I've just started rereading those again, Foundation, stuff like that.
We were talking before about just the books that you kind of always go back to, or the ones that, like, right now I'm kind of going through a classics phase of revisiting classics that I read. Well, it also has to do with the 14-year-old boy in my house, and he's a freshman in high school, so he's like reading Catcher in the Rye and Romeo and I'm like, I haven't read those since I was your age. Yeah. So I like read along. It's kind of like the best of both worlds, but it's interesting to revisit those from our childhood and those that intrigued us from the beginning to see if they still do. Inspire, bring some piece of yourself to bubble up to it.
They do. And pretty much all my Kindle reading list is all bad science fiction at this point.
No rom-coms in there?
No.
Nothing with a pastel cover and a hydrangea?
No, not unless there's some cyborgs in it.
That would be a twist we didn't see coming.
No.
Oh, yes.
The types of projects, obviously, you're working on Love, Death, and Robots at Netflix. What types of obviously that's ongoing, but what type of projects are you looking for there that you want to tackle moving forward?
I love genre stuff. I love science fiction. I love stuff that's a little bit tweak and a little bit weird. So I love the surreal. I love, if I could find a way of doing something like Annihilation, I would just kill. I would just be so happy.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. Oh, well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it since we're out of time.
Jen, thank you so much for being with us. Our time flew today, but thank you for everything. And you're always so generous with us.
It's a pleasure. It's so wonderful to be here.
It's so great to catch up.
Yeah.
And it's like, watching you over the years since I got to meet you when I was like right into the PR world, and watching you at Dreamworks, and I was always in awe of you, and I'm so excited for all of your success and everything you've been able to do for women, and especially in your field. It's incredible. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity, and it's a great time to be working.
Agree. All right,
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe and leave a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. To stay up to date with In Her Words, join the conversation by following Women in Entertainment on our social channels and subscribe to our weekly newsletter at womeninentertainment.com.